Welcome to Read and Think. This is where a book that I'm reading, certain phrases catch my eye and make me think, and I'm sharing with you. First up, Thomas Sowell in his Cultures and Conquests book. Continuing here with Thomas Sowell in his great book, he brings up that in addition to having an economy less subject to government controls than in most other countries, the British people and British institutions had centuries of experience as a commercial nation before it became the first industrial nation. So what Napoleon disdainfully referred to as a nation of shopkeepers was a nation with a vast accumulation of experience in economic transactions, as well as a wide range of human capital in the form of specific skills that would all contribute to its later industrial growth. So the industrial nation just didn't happen in Britain. A lot of circumstances that we're going to read about came up, and that formula or that mix contributed to it. But what happened is that they actually had a commercial sensibility before. This is not something that you could take for granted in history. As we'll see somewhere in the future, the Russian state had nobles, and it had peasants, and the merchants, and any kind of transactional business was widely disdained. And so this is not something that you could take for granted. We do today, but not at that time. What this also suggests is that there are phases towards vast change, that there's commercial sensibilities before industrial ones. So that also is human capital, which is not just money, but skills, insights, knowledge, learning, implementation of those skills, and a number of other things. One thing of note is that the British actually worked to increase their transportation capability. So, long before it was a country of factories and railroads, Britain in general, and England in particular, was a country of improved highways that greatly facilitated the movement of people, goods, and raw materials, even though they were moving by nothing more revolutionary than horse-drawn vehicles. The building of turnpikes in England began in the latter half of the 17th century, and by the 18th century, a substantial highway had been created. Thanks to the rapid spread of turnpikes, travel times from London to many parts of England by stagecoach in 1821 was half of what it was in 1750. So what you have in England that's particular is the turnpike system and the ability to move goods, people, services, anywhere fast. That leads to a lot of development. I read another book where it talked about the substantial revolution required in France to increase its road and capabilities. Some of the roads there had not been improved since Roman times into the 1600s. So they were difficult, and therefore there was not a lot of profitability in terms of moving goods and making connections, bring new services or materials or raw materials, capital goods, etc., anywhere. So that's a big contrast in England. And therefore they were actually had this networking sensibility early on, which of course aided the transactional element and that skill set, which then aided the Industrial Revolution. So it's interesting to see how different layers work with different things, and that one before the other in terms of making conditions is a substantial contribution to the overall effect, as we'll see when they become the world's first industrial nation. The country's geography was another favorable influence on its economic progress. Britain's iron ore and coal deposits were located near to one another, and both were located near the sea. An enormous advantage over most continental European countries, where even a distance of 10 miles between the two minerals was a formidable obstacle to early German industrial development. So when we think about that, it's just the luck of the draw in terms of geography. How does geography influence a culture, development, a people, an outlook on the world, and the use of other materials? In this case, I was very surprised by the idea that iron ore and coal juxtaposed together in Britain's geography was such a factor. I hadn't thought about that. The other factor is the sea. They're an island. So when they had to move goods from one part of the country to the other, they would simply put it on a ship, sail around to the other side of the country, and then unload it. Now, in today's world, of course, we're used to FedEx and airplane traffic and everything else and freeways where things are fast. But could you imagine putting things on a cart and having to go 200 miles in that cart with horses to deliver your goods? A virtual impossibility. By using the sea, though, and ships, you would be able to transport more goods cheaper. Because once a ship is sailing, it's basically the wind and the conditions and, of course, the crew and everything else you need. But at the same time, it was a substantial lessening of costs, reduced the cost when you went by sea. And that's something we'll see over and over again.